Well, do I have a treat for you guys? Check this out. So normally this wheel will tuck a lot more. I don't know whether maybe because there's no front sway bar in at the moment, it might not be counteracting the chassis. I think that's what people say the front sway bar does to help the rear end work. But I mean, you can at least see how much, that's basically at the level of the sill now. So that's actually working bloody beautifully. Yeah, there's still plenty more to go on the rear here. As you can see, I'm not even close to bottoming that shock out. And that will just bottom out on the rubber bump stop that I've put on that under a really hard kind of compression. But yeah, I mean, we've got some good tuck, which is nice. Doesn't that just look way better? I mean, my only issue, I don't know if you're able to see, it's not really an issue, I can fix it up a bit, but the coilover on full kind of droop in this area, it's probably a bit too dark, but it's just touching the radius arm bracket. So I may be able to trim the radius arm bracket down, I mean, because it doesn't really need this big kind of part that's past the bolt. So I may do that. But yeah, I mean, for the first test off the hoist, that's looking mighty fine. So I've still got to play around with kind of ride height settings and all the coilovers set up, but it's looking good. It's working how I want. Whether the front sway bar will in fact help the rear end work, in my mind, it's using the front axle to apply torsion back to the chassis, which is wanting to straighten it out, I think. I don't know, anyway. So yeah, that's obviously a massive improvement. I might actually, just for shits and giggles, I might throw some photos doing the equivalent kind of flex test with the forklift. Same rear end setup, just with the IFS, and you can see what kind of difference there is. This thing is going to be so awesome off-road. Still a few little things to tidy up. I've just spent the last day and a half, or basically 2 days, just getting everything in the engine bay remounted. So, as I said, I'm waiting for my hub spaces. Once I've got them, I can get the brakes sorted, get the wheel bearings finally packed and installed for good, get the locking hubs on as well. So now I can go and clean up all the mess that I've made over the whole weekend. It's one of those every tool out, shit everywhere kind of weekends, but it's worth it. So I will see you at the next milestone. All right, so it's been a little while since I've filmed anything. It's probably actually been close to a couple of weeks since, I don't even remember what the last video was actually, but I probably gave you a run through on everything pretty well set up. I've just been tinkering away with some other stuff, which I'll show you once I get this out of the way. I think where I left you, I had designed the hub spaces, then I was sending them off to my machinist to machine me and anodize and send back to me. I'll obviously test them out. I obviously need them expedited for my situation. The next kind of big thing that I guess is directly associated with the solid axle swap is doing some brake lines. So I figured I may as well give you guys a bit of a rundown. A lot of the guys in the four-wheel drive industry who haven't come from the more performance market may not be too familiar with AN lines. So I'll give you a rundown on what I'm doing for brake lines and a quick run through on how to set these up. So yeah, let's do it. Okay, so I am going to be using AN lines for my brake lines. Most people just go to a hydraulic shop and they'll make these for you. For me, it's easier for me to just do it here. And also I didn't know what exactly I wanted, so I'll run you through kind of the bits I've bought if you want to follow this. I must stress that if you don't know what you're doing with this stuff, I wouldn't be attempting to make your own brake lines because obviously they're a very important part of your vehicle. But myself, and I'm sure plenty of you guys out there have used AN line before. There are different series. So this is 200 series, which is a Teflon inner with a braid over the top. I've opted for the black silicone casing over that braid as well, mainly because it looks nice and clean, and also with the exposed braid, mud and all that stuff kind of builds up on the stainless kind of mesh. So this will keep it nice and clean. Hopefully the dirt and mud should just shed straight off it. And also it's nice and stealthy and it just looks clean. It's an extra step in assembling your hose when you've got the kind of black or whatever color. You can get clear as well. Over braid on it, but it's not really a big deal. So to the lines that I'm doing, I've got a banjo bolt. So looks like a banjo. Pretty common for brakes and brake calipers. So the way the banjo works is you have a bolt that's got a through hole and it comes out the side there, and then that just sandwiches against whatever you're kind of mounting it on. Usually with copper washers. High pressure stuff, we'll use something called a Doughty seal, which is like a washer with a rubber. It's more for kind of like industrial hydraulics. I think motorbikes use them a bit as well. But anyway, I digress. So that'll be at the caliper end. And then at the vehicle end, this is just I can't remember what the technical name is, but a union that just adapts from -3, which this line is, to a M10 by 1 female thread, and then you get the little inverted flare adapter, so that will sit inside there. Obviously because these factory fittings are inverted flare, you need to have that in there for that to seal. So this is obviously one that I prepared earlier, so I figured I'll give you guys a quick rundown on how these are done. There are probably a lot better videos out on how to assemble 200 series. So you need to use 200 series for brakes. You can't use 100 series, which has got the rubber inner and it assembles differently. You need to use the 200 series. So this is good for brakes, clutch, any hydraulic stuff. I use it actually on my performance vehicles for pretty much everything. Fuel lines, especially good for fuel because it doesn't permeate smell. And also I use it for all my oil cooler lines as well. I just think it holds up to heat in the engine bay and everything better than the rubber. The Teflon's a very durable material, and it's just, I find them easy to put together as well, as you'll probably see in the video. And then for those of you interested, this is the part number for the banjo, and this is the part number for the M10 by 1 to -3 union. So like I said, all -3 stuff, so you want to make sure that you get the right size fittings for obviously the size of the line using. -3 and -4 are probably the most common for brake lines. So yeah, let's get into it. So the way these work is you've got kind of your outer sleeve here, so that unwinds. Then you've got an olive, which is usually brass, so you'll see how that works in a sec. You don't want to lose them, that's the most important part. And then you've obviously got the main body where this end here will push inside the hose. So the first thing to do is obviously make sure you got some clean cuts on your hose, which mine are. So one thing I always like to do is insert the end of the fitting into the hose. That just kind of smooths out any dags that might be there from the cut, and also kind of makes it concentric again. So when you go to actually assemble it, chances are it'll go in straight away. So one thing you got to do with the hose that's got the extra kind of silicone over braid, you'll have to cut off about probably 5 to 7 mil. So once you've got that bit cut off, you can pretty much, I'll probably stuff it up because I'm doing it on camera, but you can, so you can see that you can fold it back onto itself and kind of roll it down like so. That obviously needs to be out of the way to get the outer body on. So next you want to get that on. Sometimes I find it helps to kind of twist it and it will kind of follow the braid. So then the next thing you need to do is spread the stainless outer braid off and away from the inner Teflon body. So using like a little pick like this works really well, I've found. It's going to be hard to show on the camera, I think, but you got to insert this olive over the Teflon but under the stainless braid. This is usually where you get stabbed in the finger. So then once you've kind of got it started, I'll just use the hose upside down on the bench and just push it down. As you can see there, that's basically what you want. So the olive is on the Teflon, and the Teflon is pushed all the way up to the kind of seat there, you'll see it. And then the stainless braid is over that, and this comes over the stainless braid. So the next thing is to insert the fitting, and the olive will bottom out on where the threads start, and then you literally just pull this up and start winding it on. And this is where it helps to have a vise. I'll normally throw it in the vise and literally just wind it down. So this will clamp everything together, and you know, once you've done a few of these, you get pretty quick. And I find them nice and easy to assemble. You can actually do them as you saw me do without having to put them in a vise really, except for when you do the final kind of assembly. Although with the bigger fittings, you can just use 2 spanners, so you don't have to keep going to the bench. You can kind of just do it at the vehicle. So yeah, that's snug down, and you can literally just roll the outer braid back down. And sometimes if you've cut it right, it will just push back in and fold inside the fitting with a little bit of finesse. So yeah, that's literally all there is to doing these AN fittings. They're not that hard, but you obviously need to be careful of a couple of things when they're going together. So yeah, I'll obviously do the other one off camera because it's exactly the same thing. All right, so here we go. We've got the brake lines installed. I'm pretty happy with this actually. It's nice and tidy, and not going to get caught up on stuff. So normally people will kind of run them from the chassis down to here. You can see I've obviously got my breather there, but that's not as crucial if that gets knocked out. Obviously if I'm going through a bog hole or some water and it's open, that's a problem, but not as bad as having your brake lines smashed off. So obviously this is the axle at full droop, so this is as low as it's going to go. There obviously is room. Obviously the closer you get back to the pivot here, the less this distance is going to move. So you know, this will probably at ride height probably come up another 50 mil. So we've got plenty of hose on that, and obviously for the axle moving kind of laterally with the panhard through its kind of articulation as well, there's plenty of room for that. So you can see we've got the banjo fitting on the brake caliper there, and then I've got an oversized, so these are all tapped, drilled and tapped into the radius arms, so they're all nice and secure. Back to what I was saying, I've got an oversized P-clamp here so that line can move in and out. That's basically just to stop it moving over and getting stuck in the coil. And then along here I've got 2 P-clamps. So these ones are tight, so the cable can't slide on that. And then up here, just used a hole that was already there, put a stud and another P-clamp that mounts the kind of ring boss for the union here. So it's all nice and solid, it ain't go anywhere, so pretty happy with that. And then same over this side as well, except I didn't have a bracket here, so I've just drilled and tapped a P-clamp into the top of the chassis rail there, and yeah, that's nice and solid. So quite happy with that, and feel free to use that method if you choose. Only thing I'm going to have to do is on the other side, I took this bottom off and turned it down to the diameter of the spring. I didn't do this side because it wasn't an issue, because obviously the other side was hitting the radius arm bracket, but this side was fine. So the problem is when this caliper is over at full lock, it's going to want to touch this. So I'm going to have to pull this off, so I'll just basically compress the springs and slip that off, go throw it in the lathe and turn it down the same as the other side, and we should be golden. Tolerances are very tight, but everything is working. So all I need now are the hub spacers, and can get these hubs rebuilt with new bearings, and yeah, get the brakes on, and we're pretty much ready to drive. And another tip I'll show you guys, well, this is what I do anyway. When you're going to be working on brakes for a while and you don't want to drain all the fluid out, so what I do is I just take an old banjo bolt. For this instance, I think this is from my Subi actually. I'll just weld up the hole that's in the bottom that obviously the fluid comes through, and then just a bit of thread tape and wind it in. And you know, that kept all the brake fluid leaking out throughout the process of building this. So that's a neat little trick. And I guess while I'm down here, I may as well show you some other stuff I've done. So I've got a nice shiny new exhaust, and I finished off my long range tank, which you can see nicely mounted up there. So I had to remake the exhaust, obviously, because my previous one came down where the tail shaft is, and also kind of through here, which is now all different. So, which is good because I needed to remake it for the tank. So I ended up just chopping my old dump pipe, putting a new V-band in the ideal spot that I wanted it, so that when I put the new turbo on, I can just join straight into that and all this exhaust can stay. So it just comes under here, nice and tight. It should be out of the way of the tail shaft on full bump, and it comes through under here. And then I've got a sneaky little exhaust cutout mounted in there on a couple of vibration mounts. So that's nice and hidden. And then I've got the offshoot kind of dump pipe there. For those of you who are wondering what that weird notch in my tank was for, that is for the exhaust. So it's kind of hard to show on camera. I might have some better photos. I'll throw them on the screen if I do. But that goes up in there. Everything is packaged quite nicely. And I guess while I'm under here, the tank turned out very nice. Lots of aluminium TIG rods were killed in the making of this tank, but it's pretty tough. I've put an extra kind of folded section and welded there, because that's going to be the likely spot where things are going to impact. It should still be okay with the ramp over. The center of the vehicle is somewhere here now, or center of the current wheelbase, somewhere here. So this is further back from center. So, I mean, I've never hit any of my other stuff under here. So it should be good. We'll see how it goes. If it does become such a problem, I will consider cutting it down, but I'd rather not lose, you know, 5 or 10 litres of capacity if I don't need to. So I'll see how that goes. I also just welded some 50mm by 3 plate all along here, basically just like a slider. Also strengthens up the corner. All these are welded internally and externally, and I think this side was actually a fold. So it's got as much strength as I can give it, short of bloody double sheeting it or doing it in like 6mm alley. So I've just got a mount on the side here, a mount on the back there. I've also got one on the opposite side of this, kind of where the exhaust is, that goes up to the kind of crossbar between the chassis. You can't see it on camera because it's super tight. You can see the exhaust better from here, so it just comes out as high as possible. Another V-band at the back here. Obviously excuse the ugly paint runs on the back of the tank there. That was a bit of a late night rush job. So yeah, got another mount at the back there, and I ended up, you can see that plate, I've just tapped a thread into that, and that plate locks in against that kind of chassis tie or crossbar, and that's got a thread in it, and yeah, it's like a long kind of nut, so don't need to get a spanner in there to undo it. So continuing on with the exhaust, just runs out next to my battery. Just got a 300mm bullet muffler, and then a nice downturn exhaust tip. So it's got a nice note. I would have liked to have put a bigger muffler in, but obviously I'm kind of tight for space, so it's still fine. I'll be interested to see how it goes cruising on the freeway, but beggars can't be choosers. So plumbing to the tank, again, tight packaging, but I've made it work. So I've got some 38mm stainless that comes out and gets us up a bit higher. Then we transition into the 38mm silicone hose, which goes through top of the chassis rail where the normal main tank filler is. And then obviously I've got a vent line, you can see coming out just above there. So that's running up there with the filler hose. And I've also got a facet transfer pump. These are good quality pumps, so I've just got that kind of mounted there on some tapped threads. So I'm just waiting for an elbow for here, and then I can plumb the feed line. So the feed from the sub tank goes and tees into the breather line of the main tank, so that will just go through and fill up the main tank via the breather line. And then I've had to do a custom job for the filler. Obviously I've put the cover back on now, but I'll throw a photo on the screen. So basically I've taken the main tank breather, cut that off and moved it to the other side. And then where that was, I've basically joined in another bit of 38mm tube. And the intention is that I'll just angle the nozzle at the Bowser to go to either tank. If it does become an issue, I might make a custom funnel that I can insert, that I can aim directly at the sub tank feed. But basically it's worked out well. It obviously still fits under the cover, which is good. I also run my locker solenoids in here as well. I don't like running them in the cabin because when you turn the locker off, that air that it expels normally takes a bit of diff oil with it. So yeah, we are inching closer. It's pretty much ready to drive, like I said. As soon as I get those hub spaces and get the hubs rebuilt, I also have to do the locking hubs as well. I might actually do that this arbo if I've got time. Yeah, I can just keep peeling all these to-do things off the windscreen and then we'll be good to go hopefully. Okay, so this is where I'm at. I'm pretty happy. So I actually did this yesterday. I shot the previous videos yesterday, but the issue I was having, actually I'll come over this side. Hopefully I can show you. So the issue I was having was when I had the line going kind of up that way or even across that way, I was hitting the coilover when everything was on full droop and full lock, which the chances of actually having the vehicle at that point are very slim, but I'd rather not have that problem. So this is how I've ended up running it. It's just going down, and then I originally had the hose coming around the front here, which was really neat. Had it all out of the way. Obviously there's more chance of this getting caught on something, but I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue. I mean, it's flexible, it's strong, and it barely hangs below the axle. So I think I should be right. It's kind of the only thing I could do due to obviously the clearance with the coilover. So yeah, I've just drilled and tapped P-clips onto the radius arm and then just one into here. So that one can move and these ones are a tight one. So that hose is locked in there. And then obviously same thing on this side. So that's basically it at full lock. So there's still a bit of flex on there. Everything's out of the way. I'm pretty happy. All right, holy shit. It is almost test drive time. So hub spaces work. I've got them on, got the discs on, everything's located nicely. Yeah, everything's back together, locking hubs, everything. The thing's literally ready to drive. A lot of you guys are already familiar with hub spaces. For those of you who aren't, it doesn't space your hub. It's not a wheel spacer, it spaces your brake disc back, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so it's looking all nice and finished. The only thing I do need to do is bleed the brakes, which I'll do in a sec. I thought I'd film this before I put the compressor on, but yeah, that's the hub spacer there. So that spaces the brake disc back into the center of the caliper. Billet 7075 T6 aluminium, half the weight of the traditional steel ones that people sell, and obviously will never rust, and it's got a mil-spec hard anodizing like all the parts I sell. So yeah, they look very sleek. And these are my favorite rotors as well, the ones that have got that black kind of, I wouldn't call it passivated, but they've got the black coating all over the whole rotor. So the only part that will be exposed to rusting is where the pads are rubbing. So pet peeve of mine is, you know, the bell of the rotor and all this stuff kind of rusting. So yeah, I've also rebuilt the locking hubs, pulled them all apart, checked everything out and cleaned it, and also just greased what I needed to grease. So they're all installed, they're all working. But yeah, I mean, the list of things to do is shrinking, and they're all pretty small stuff really. So if I'm not mistaken, the next bit of this video should be finally driving this, and I cannot wait because it's gonna be very interesting. Hopefully there's no, look, I'm pretty confident, but hopefully there's no annoying things that need to be fixed or changed. Everything seems to go okay. I've obviously flexed it up on the forklift prior and everything seemed to be okay. Couple of things that I had to clearance, but I think that's all done now. Oh yeah, and also I'll have to give an alignment, which I'll probably do, I don't know, either today if I got time or do it tomorrow morning when I come in. And then, yeah, I might actually switch the camera on for the alignment and kind of see what specs we ended up with on the front end. Caster, hopefully camber's pretty equal and, you know, zeroed out as well. So yeah, it'd be very interesting. So I will see you soon. All right, momentous occasion. Well, actually I did it the other week, but this time it was actually out on its own steam. and we're on the aligner. So I've just pretty well finished up and pretty happy with the numbers here. So got a good amount of caster. So that allows for the ride height to raise and still have some decent caster. I'm probably not planning on raising it, but if it does, and also through its kind of articulation on the road, you know that it's still gonna have good caster. Camber, pretty close. So the axle, you know, not bent or anything, which is good. And then toe. It's a little bit fiddly with the toe. So I'd say the only downside to this kind of setup is you do get a little bit of slop in this ball joint. Can't remember whether I mentioned that last time, but there is a solution and I may end up doing it. I'm gonna see how it goes first. So you do get a little bit of slop from that, but obviously when you're driving it may not be as noticeable as, you know, what you'd see on the alignment machine, because that's obviously super finicky. Like any slight movement will throw numbers out. But yeah, everything's looking good. Yeah, I guess I'll just finish this off, take all the stuff off and throw some fuel in it and probably go for the first kind of putt around just this area just to check there's no knocks or any weird noises. I'm pretty confident, but unfortunately you don't know until you actually drive the car and put it in some real world conditions. So yeah. All right, so I figured while I've got it running, I'll give you guys a quick demo on how the exhaust sounds. Not that it really matters on a shitty old thing like this, but it's got a decent note to it. As you saw, it's only got the bullet muffler on the back, and then obviously I've got the cutout as well, so I'll alternate between the two and you can hear the difference. So yeah, sounds all right for a shitty old diesel, I suppose. But oh, actually, there's one more thing I need to tell you about. Four-wheel drive. I'll turn this off. So obviously, because this had the ADD front diff, so auto disconnect differential, I think it is. Whatever, something along those lines. Basically, you push the button, vacuum actuator slides the dog clutch across and engages the front diff. And then once that's engaged, there's a sensor. Well, that's what there was with the IFS. Now obviously because that's gone, I'll put a photo up on the screen. So you've got two plugs that go to your, what was your front diff. Basically you need to find the two wires for the sensor for the dog clutch. And then you can literally just jump those two together. So what I ended up doing was disconnecting that little short bit of loom at the 4-pin plug, and then just using a tail of a diode or something and bridging it between the two terminals, then just taped it up. So obviously I need to lock the hubs. And then all I do is just push the 4-wheel drive button on the stick. And then obviously I've got the lever which goes low range and also high range. So that's all working as it should. Obviously I just need to remember to get out and lock the hubs. I can imagine that I'm probably going to forget that a few times in the first, you know, kind of outings. So yeah, I think that's everything pretty well covered. I'm going to take this for a drive and fingers crossed. All right, so I just got back from the first drive, and obviously always a good sign when you can make it back in the vehicle that you left in, with all parts still attached, so we're looking good. Brakes are somewhat better than. It stops decent enough. So I guess firstly pros, it rides so much nicer. Like I can hit one of the roads I took, there's a bit of a median strip with a garden in the middle. Kind of just went straight up the rollover curb, and you know, the suspension took it up quite nice. I had the dampers on 1, so I've wound them up to 4 now, so I'll see how that feels on the next drive. It felt good on 1, but you can definitely notice the body roll in more tight corners. So yeah, everything's feeling good and strong and, you know, aligned and nice and, I don't know, good. Everything's good. So one of the first things that I am going to play around with and try a little bit more is steering lock. So if you remember, I had to take the lock stop bolts out. Well, I had to take the lock stop tabs off the diff. And then I've put the bolt back in without the nut on the inside. So the nut's now on the back side, so you've just got the small little thing. I'm gonna try and shave a bit off that and sink it back a bit so I can get a little bit more lock. It's not much, I can just notice a little bit, and there is some to gain. I could actually take the bolt out altogether and just use the actual casting of the knuckle to hit. I'll suss it out. I'll see what I can take off the actual lock stop bolt, just to pull that back in a bit and get a bit more lock. Another thing which I was literally just mentioning, so I am going to machine up a Delrin bush basically. So what's happening, hopefully I can do it. So you can see how that rotates. It's kind of hard to do it with one hand, but that essentially translates to when you turn the steering wheel, that assembly will rotate before then the tie rod will turn the wheels. So what I'm going to do is just machine up a Delrin spacer, and I'll probably put it on this ball joint. So that will just stop this whole assembly from rotating, and that should take the slop out of the steering wheel that I was feeling. I was aware of it. I know it's a common issue with this type of steering link arrangement, but yeah, I thought I'd test it before doing so, see how it is. You can definitely notice it, it's not that bad, but obviously it's an easy fix with the lathe. And if it is a good thing, I may actually end up adding that to my product range. So yeah. Oh, and I guess while I'm down here, this is the lock stop I was telling you about. So I've had to, normally that lock nut is against the casting there, then this is out a little bit further. Then you've normally got a tab where it hits. So obviously, because I've got all this stuff in the way, I've just pushed that all the way in. But ideally that needs to keep going in, I don't know, probably the amount of the flats for the spanner. So I might be able to chuck it up in the lathe and kind of just bore the head right back just to that little kind of radius section. That might give us enough lock. And then the other thing, which isn't really a big deal, but it will get annoying, is I may have to slightly change the exhaust. So what I've found is normally when you're dumping exhaust out kind of in this undercarriage area, it kind of reverberates in the back and makes it louder than it really is. So I may have to extend this tip down a little bit. Like I really love how it is now. And to be honest, before it was basically in the same spot, but I had a bit of a slash cut. I had a 90, I think, with a slash cut. So it's pretty much dumping in the same spot, but it's definitely louder. And obviously because I don't have as big a muffler as last time, that's obviously a bit of a difference. But yeah, I mean, apart from those little things, which you're always gonna have little things after you've done any job, especially such a big job like this, that's pretty much all really. I obviously need to drive it a lot more and get a feel for everything, and hopefully anything else that's potentially wrong will rear its head. But yeah, everything's pretty good so far. I'm gonna do these and I'm not sure where I'll see you next. I am hoping to go and do a bit of an off-road test. Hopefully I'll get Brett to come along with us, and so we can give it a bit of a basic kind of test on these simple-ish trails about half an hour from where we are. And at least we can test kind of four-wheel drive, low range, and the actual benefits of having a solid front axle. So yeah. Okay, so a bit of an update. We have taken this surf for its maiden voyage with the solid axle front, and yeah, I'll give you a quick kind of wrap up on how it went, but in short, perfect. So I've just got back to the workshop, just pulled the surf in, just given everything a once over. Everything's looking pretty good. I guess I'll start with the cons. There's an annoying kind of squeak coming from somewhere in the engine bay. I think it may potentially be this part of the body rubbing on the coilover mount. So it's probably the only thing that you can see that it has been rubbing, and it's obviously touching now. The body has moved a little bit. There used to be a little bit of clearance there and not so much clearance here. So the body has moved a little bit. So what I'll end up doing is I'll just get the tin snips and cut that back a little bit and spray it, and then hopefully that's that problem sorted. I mean, everything in the engine bay was pretty much the same as it was anyway, so that's all good. So then yeah, under the car's looking all hunky-dory. Everything worked, four-wheel drive worked fine. I mean, it feels great. It's honestly absolutely brilliant. I filled the sub-tank up completely for the first time today. It holds about high, it's hard to judge exactly, but high 70, low 80 litres. So that's, you know, almost 1.5 times more than what the standard tank holds. And the transfer pump works super nicely. It took maybe 15-20 minutes to basically fill that tank from empty to full from this tank. But yeah, basically the Savo, I went and picked up my good mate Brett on the way, and we went out to some local trails, well, somewhat local, they're within half an hour or so of us, and there's nothing that crazy there. There's a couple of kind of like wombat holes, and it's definitely gotten a bit more rutted out, which is good since all the rain that we've had here recently. So it made it a little bit harder, a bit more of a challenge, but to be honest, it just walks pretty much everything. Yeah, I mean, off-road obstacles, amazing. On-road, great. I do need to get the sway bar set up. For slight corners, it's okay, but if you do a really hard kind of lane change, obviously there's nothing to counteract that body roll, so it handles pretty well considering, but it does need a sway bar just to control that kind of on-road manners. I couldn't fit the 80 series front one because I've got exhaust and stuff in the way, and all the bends in it are just going the wrong way, unfortunately, which is really annoying. Just riding on the dirt roads, it is absolutely night and day. So heading into the track, obviously with all the rain, there's been a lot of kind of erosion, big potholes. So still on highway pressures, so like 40 pound front, 45 rear roughly. Probably even more because they were warm. I could hit those bumps at decent speed. Suspension soaks it all up nicely. The riders are super plush, like Brett noticed straight away, because he's driven the car in all its forms. So yeah, super happy with it. It's going awesome. I thought we'd just head out this afternoon and get some footage fresh after doing this. Obviously gives it a shakedown as well, so you've probably been seeing B-roll footage put in over this video. If not, I'll throw some in a sec. But yeah, I mean, I'm super stoked. Just a few minor things like I touched on before, but you get that with these kind of builds. So everything's well and truly kind of worn in now. The suspension had settled a little bit, so I had to raise it back up maybe 10 mil or so. But yeah, everything seems to be performing well, so I am super happy. Wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't think twice about doing this. I'd do it every time, so pretty happy. Definitely worth the work, worth the effort, worth the money, and yeah. Don't know where this is going to fall in the series. It may be the end of the solid axle swap series, and then you can stay tuned for other videos. I don't know. So if this is the end of the series, hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. I mean, I learned some stuff along the way. Got it all to work, so that's the main thing. But yeah, thank you very much, and stay posted for some more.